Good evening, everyone. I'm Marianne Peters, and for those whom I haven't met, I'm the CEO of the Carter Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first conversation of the 2017-2018 season. The series gives us an opportunity to discuss Carter Center peace and health efforts, as well as current world issues with our neighbors in the Atlanta area. But of course, tonight's conversation is a very special one, as we'll get a chance to hear from a former president and first lady. Would you like to guess which ones? If you have a question for one of them, please write it on the index cards we've provided. I already have some here. Volunteers will walk down the aisles to collect your questions at about 7:20. Now, there are a couple things I need to say before I turn the podium over to President and Mrs. Carter. First, I'd like to put in a plug for our next conversation, which will be on September 26th, just 2 weeks away. You do want to be here, as three highly regarded panelists will discuss the rise of Islamophobia and its effects across the globe. You can make your free reservations for this event at cartercenter.org. Second, I'd like to offer a special welcome to the Rosalind Carter Mental Health Journalism Fellows who are in attendance. Many of them came in spite of Hurricane Irma. Many more couldn't make it or were waved away, but would the fellows please stand up? Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'd also like to offer a special welcome to our Ambassador Circle guests and any Board of Trustee or Board of Counselors members who are here in the audience. Would you please stand up? Thank you very much. Lastly, I want to remind you to please silence your cell phones, but feel free to tweet about what you hear using the hashtag Carter Town Hall, capital C-T and H 17. And now, the reason we're all here. President and Mrs. Carter founded the center 35 years ago, and since then, the center's programs have helped to improve the lives of millions of people in more than 80 countries. Our staff of 200 here and 1,200 overseas wage peace, fight disease, and build hope by engaging officials at the highest levels, but even more important, by working side by side with people in their own communities, often at the end of the road. President and Mrs. Carter are, bar none, the center's hardest working team. They are an inspiration to all of us, and they are integrally engaged in our work. They've traveled the world with our staff, monitoring elections, resolving conflicts, promoting human rights, and helping to eradicate disease. Their vision and values guide our work at the Carter Center every day and serve as an inspiration to millions of people around the world. Please join me in welcoming President and Mrs. Carter.
Thank you, Marianne. Well, thank you for coming again, and I think a lot of you are the reason why the Carter Center is now 35 years old, and it's because we have a lot of support from people like you who have confidence in us and are willing to share what you have with us. I generally follow what Marianne tells me to do, and I'll do the same thing tonight. The Carter Center, as you know, has two major programs, and one is peace and one is health. But I've always divided up into three parts. Peace, which is just to promote disputes or conflict between countries or within countries. And then democracy and freedom with our election process, and also then health care. So tonight I'm going to outline them very briefly for you and then turn the program over to the real leader of the Carter Center, my wife, Rosalind. So let me say, first of all, in the case of peace, we just finished as part of our democracy program and elections, our 104th election in Kenya. As you may know, the Kenyan election was nullified by the Supreme Court. We declared that the election itself was okay, but that the collation of results and the sending them in and the handling of the results by the Election Commission was not observable by us. And after we left Kenya, most of us, the Supreme Court ruled that the election was fraudulent, potentially, and called another election in 60 days. So we still have a staff on the ground, and we'll be monitoring that process very carefully. The other election that we're going to have soon is in one of our favorite countries in Africa, and that is Liberia. As most of you know, Liberia is the closest country historically with the United States in Africa. And because the long prevailing government there was formed by slaves who were freed in the United States and went back to their home in Liberia and organized a government, and it survived until it was overthrown by a coup. So we're going to be monitoring the election in Liberia in October. The president of Liberia, who is the first woman elected president in Africa, will be stepping down. She can't run again, so this will be the first time, if things go well, there will be a democratic transfer of power from one democratically elected leader to another, and we hope that will go well. We have massive programs in Liberia dealing with local judges and justice in Liberia, and also with our women's program to have access to information. And Rosa will describe what the program is there for mental health. In the Dominican Republic of Congo, we'll soon be issuing which we know will be a very controversial report. It deals with the #1 mining company in the Congo. This closely colluded with the government in the Congo, and they've been, we think, cheating the people of Congo out of a lot of their resources for mining products. As you know, the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the greatest repositories of mining treasures. And for a long time, instead of selling those at a competitive price to foreign buyers, special people have managed the sale and have pocketed the money, and very little of the treasure that belongs to the people of the Republic of Congo has been given to the people themselves. It's been stolen. And we'll be describing in some detail all substantiated information about how the #1 mining company in the Congo has been involved in that. And it'll be, as I said, it'll probably cause a major splash when it comes out. We're trying to work with some of the other people who are involved, like the World Bank and so forth, in this assessment. Human rights defenders, we do have this meeting every year, and the one this year has been to deal with the fears and the lack of faith in some of our basic institutions on earth, a trend that's taking place not only in the United States but in other countries as well. I'm happy to be writing a book right now on faith, and it's faith in basic things like freedom, faith in democracy, faith in the truth, and so forth. I won't go into further detail about that. I don't want to get in the political realm in America, but this is not just a matter that concerns Americans, but concerns the whole world. And we had 70 top people who came here from all over the world, a lot of women leaders, who describe what's going on in their country. And we shared this information with key members of the House and U.S. Senate after our session was over, which we always do. Syria, as you know, is the #1 conflict on earth. It's been going on now for almost going on 6 years. And as you may have read from the news, I just saw it on the NewsHour from NPR. The Assad regime has taken over about 80% of the country of Syria, and they're prevailing right now against most of the opposition. And what the Carter Center has done in the last 6 years since the war started was work with the United Nations officials and work with Russia. We worked with President Putin and with others and with key players from neutral countries like Switzerland and Norway and so forth, in trying to bring an early peace to Syria. Obviously, nobody's had success with that effort so far, but the Carter Center is deeply involved in all these processes, and we're right in the forefront of trying to ascertain what is happening in Syria. One of the things that we've discussed previously, I'm trying to cover things that have happened since our last session here. One of the things that we've discussed frequently has been our mapping program. The Carter Center, several years ago, began a special program of analyzing transmissions from the social media, from websites and from Facebook and Twitter and so forth. They come out of Syria, and we can pinpoint the location of a transmission, and quite often the transmitters of those messages identify themselves. And since we have a long time effort in analyzing these, we can tell who they have been in the past supporting, and now if they've changed support, so we can tell fairly accurately throughout Syria where the different military and political factions are located. And we provide this information from the very beginning to the United Nations, to the U.S. government, to the State Department and the Defense Department. Recently, the European Union has asked for this information, which we're glad to give them, and also the United Kingdom. And we always provide it with the New York Times and Economist magazine and others. So this information that comes from the Carter Center is a key information that's used by people who want to know where the different military outfits are located in a constantly changing situation inside Syria. For instance, if the United Nations or other benevolent organizations want to deliver medicine and food supplies to troubled and starving people, we can tell them the best route to take to get there, and we do that on a regular basis. We also have a program of preventing violent extremism, and we have a staff now who works on the transmissions that come out of what we now call, what we used to call ISIS, and we analyze hundreds of their transmissions and how they recruit young people to come from different countries, and we go to the countries that are most heavily affected by these young people going to join ISIS, and we provide this information to them. Morocco is one of the #1 countries, as well as Belgium, Tunisia, and France, and we call it Daesh, and so that's the name that's been used more negatively toward the organization instead of ISIS. Sudan is a special case where we've been working on peace and human rights there for a long time, as well as health care, as you know. We've had 3 meetings lately in Sudan trying to promote peace. They've been at war since 1983, when I first started going to that region, and they've suffered over 2 million deaths, and vast numbers of people have in addition to dying, have been displaced. So we're still working on Sudan. In Colombia, where I'm sure you monitored on the news media recently, the Colombian government very heroically has been trying to work out an end to a 50-year war, as you know, with so-called FARC, which has been a rebel organization in Colombia that has provided a lot of trade in drugs coming to our country and to others. And the Carter Center has been deeply involved with them, even while the negotiations were going on in Cuba, by the way, in Havana, Cuba, between FARC and the Colombian government. We were there helping them at their request. And since the peace was formulated back in November, we've tried to map the different organizations for human rights in Colombia. We've also worked with reconstituting child soldiers that worked for FARC. And so we've been in the forefront of trying to provide an easy and convenient and effective way to transfer these child soldiers from just learning how to kill each other to learn how to be effective citizens. We also deal with electoral laws in Colombia that are going to be necessary to incorporate the previous revolutionaries in FARC to become full citizens of Colombia. That's a dream for the future. I mentioned earlier, just in passing, about our Access to Information program, which has now been going on a long time in Liberia and Guatemala and Bangladesh. The last few years, we've been concentrating particularly on how women are affected in not having access to information that's crucial to them if they're the head of a family, if they are widows, or if they own property, or if they're farming and so forth. And we found there's a lot of discrimination, sometimes not deliberate perhaps by government officials, and just not providing this kind of information about health laws and property ownership laws and so forth to women. And the women have been very reluctant to move forward and say, I want information that's vital to me and my family's best wishes, best health and well-being. And so we're trying to stimulate both the women and the government agencies that prevent their getting proper information. On the health, now I finally got to health care. We celebrated in November our administration of the 500 millionth dose of medicine to people to help against. I was wondering when I was going to get my first applause. I'm glad. So I'll tell you another thing. We now have guinea worm cases left in only one country, and that's Chad. And the latest. The information we had by the end of July, we only have 9 cases in the whole world. I think there's one more case, but we now have trouble with animals in Chad in particular, but also in some of the other countries where baboons and particularly dogs and cats and so forth can contract the disease. And we're trying to learn now for the first time in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been trying to find out why the animals are so susceptible to contracting these diseases and how they transmit it ultimately to human beings. But in our former problem areas in Ethiopia and in Mali and in South Sudan, where we had guinea worm cases last year, we don't have any guinea worm cases this year. They're all concentrated in the nation of Chad. To get to river blindness, as you may have read, we're one of the finalists, one of the 8 finalists in trying to get a grant of $100 million for a particular program in health care from the MacArthur Foundation. And this month they're going to come out with the finalists. I think they have 5 finalists, is that right?
4 or 5, we're not
4
sure.
or 5 finalists. So we'll know later on in September whether we made the next cut, and then by the end of this year we'll know if we got the $100 million grant to deal with doing away with river blindness in the big nation of Nigeria. As you know, that's the largest country in population in Africa, and river blindness is a very horrible cause of blindness. And so if we get that, then we'll try to do away with river blindness in all of that largest country in Africa. We have I will get down to river blindness, and I've already done that. But in river blindness, which is onchocerciasis, river blindness and onchocerciasis are the same. We've had a program for a long time with the Merck Company where they provide us with free medicine. And that's a large part of the 500 million doses that we've given. But in this continent, here in the Americas, we have done away with river blindness completely in Ecuador, in Colombia, in Mexico, and Guatemala. And the only place we have river blindness left now in this hemisphere is just a small area on the border between Venezuela and Brazil, and we're working on that. Trachoma is another disease, as you know, that causes blindness, and we are in the forefront of surgeries to prevent the final stages of trachoma, that is blindness. And we have completed more than 700,000 operations in the final stages of trachoma. And in addition to that, we've given out 158,000 doses of Zithromax, a disease, a medicine that prevents infection. and we've helped to construct, or been monitoring the construction of more than 3.5 million outdoor privies to keep down the incidence of flies. So as I've said before, I'm known as the #1 privy builder on earth. Lymphatic filariasis is a disease also called elephantiasis. It's when the sexual organs and your arms and legs swell up to grotesque sizes, and we're dealing with that. And we have tried this, our techniques in dealing with lymphatic filariasis or elephantiasis in two of the big states in the nation of Nigeria, Nasarawa and
Plateau.
I'm sorry?
Plateau, sir.
Plateau states, yes. And we found, we ran a test on 11,000 children, 6 and 7 years old. And we found, in those two states where we've been working, we found 0 cases of infection of that disease. So we think we found out how to do that. So that's a very good program as well. Just two more quick things, and that is in Hispaniola, which is Haiti and Dominican Republic, as you know, they're the only places left in the Caribbean that has lymphatic filariasis and malaria. Malaria is quite well known to more older people in America. So we're making good progress there. And we have a public health program beginning soon in Sudan, supported by the country of Qatar. Qatar, some people call it. Qatar is what most of them call it.
People here from Qatar.
And we have some Rosas. Qatar people, raise your hand. They're very generous. They're very generous. And they're providing the funds that we'll be using in the Sudan to provide health workers. So we'll be training nurses and licensed practical nurses and some physician assistants, and also providing equipment for them, for the doctors to use, and also provide the techniques to be done. We trained about 30,000 people earlier in Ethiopia, and they're the ones that make it possible to deal so effectively with the diseases there, particularly in trachoma. One of the first exciting trips that Marianne had when she came on board, she's had a lot of exciting trips since then, was to go to Ethiopia, and in 5 days, y'all treated about 10 million people, right?
Pretty close, 9.5.
9.5 million people. Oh, I was a little bit off. And that big effort was made possible because we had earlier trained about 30,000 health workers, and they provide a backbone for our efforts there. So very hurriedly, I've gone down what I consider to be the 3 parts of the Carter Center's work: peace and democracy and freedom and health. And now Rosa will take over what she considers to be the most important work of the Carter Center, and that's mental health. Thank you very much.
I'm going to say something about trachoma before I start.
Oh, okay. I didn't. All right. I said something about mental health. So we're even.
Well, trachoma is blinding. With this disease, the eyelashes turn in and they scrape the cornea. And what they do, and it's just so painful. And what they do is pull out their eyebrows with tweezers.
Eyelashes.
What?
Eyelashes.
Eyelashes. Eyelashes. With tweezers made out of tin cans. And when the eyelashes grow back in, they are sharper than they were before. But the surgery that Jimmy was talking about is just, you teach nurses to do it. It's just a little incision here and pull up the eye lid, and they can see. And so the young woman from the Carter Center who's working in Ethiopia in this one big area trying to get rid of it, said that they come in and they get the surgery and they don't need the tweezers anymore. So they started stacking up on her desk. And so she started making necklaces with them. So we now have necklaces with tweezers hanging down on them. So I think we're for sale here, aren't they? Anyway, it's really wonderful to see them stacking up in a big pile. Well, today, my mental health fellowship program is so exciting, and this is one of my favorite times of the year to see our fellows coming in. And for you who don't know, so many of you have heard me talk about this for years, but for those of you who don't know, we bring journalists to the Carter Center and teach them to report accurately and in-depth on mental health issues. And we've had programs and we stay in a country, I think 5 years. Sometimes it has to be a little longer because we try to stay there until they can sustain the program. And so we've had them in South Africa and Romania and New Zealand, started in New Zealand. And now we have people here from, well, we have Colombia is been with us a while, and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar are new the last year or two. And the storm made a big dent in how many people came. We had one task force member, one advisory committee member. We actually did call these people who are from out of town and just say, don't try to come, because yesterday was our first day. And so we're supposed to have 28 fellows come, the biggest crowd we've ever had. We had 15, but all of them came from Colombia, from UAE, and from Qatar. And I don't know whether we had one we might have had one or two from our country. But anyway, so we've had a really good time listening to those who, well, it lasts for a year. And so we have the incoming ones who report on what they've been working on for a year, and then the new ones reporting on what they're going to be doing in the next year. And it's just an exciting time, and I'm thrilled to have them here. Colombia has been so good. The La Sabana Universidad is just has been so wonderful to work with it. We have the Dean of the School of Medicine here and the Dean of the School of Communications with us. We not only have the fellows, we have the administrators of the programs and some of the people who work with the Al Jalila Foundation and the other foundation. Wish Foundation. I don't know how I forgot that. They're both so important and have worked really hard to be sure the programs in the UAE and Qatar work. And they've done a fantastic job, as La Sabana has done with Colombia. And I was actually telling Jimmy, one of the Colombia fellows, about the work with the FARC, that you did with the FARC. And so I've got several different things. I've got it all written down, things I was going to tell you. So, okay, I didn't put them in any order, though. As you know, we've been having symposia every year. Well, last year was the last time we did that, because we're changing what we're working on. With the symposia, we have people come in from all over the country to work on a current mental health subject. There's so many advances in the mental health field and so many different people doing that we decided to work, and there's a trend toward population health. And by population health, it's working on something that is needed in the whole population. For instance, we have a program called CHINS, Children in Need of Services. And we have a 5-county area with 5 judges, actually 4 judges, and one is an associate judge, that are working with children, at-risk children and adolescents, trying to keep them from having their first incarceration. And the judges are running the program. And there is a law on the books that says these children need help, but it doesn't have anything about how to help them. And so it's just been a hodgepodge in the country. But if we can develop an evidence-based program, and that's one that works, it's been tried and tried and tried until you get it down so that it works, then we can send it out across the whole population. And so this is the program we're working on that's one that we're working on right now. And I'm excited about it because it's going so good. The juvenile justice courts are the judges are the first ones that see these young people when they get in trouble. So we're proud of that program. Another thing we're doing in our mental health program is looking to see how we can treat depression with telemedicine, particularly in the rural areas of our state. There are just a real lack of services in rural Georgia and in rural areas across the country. And we are working to see if that can happen, and also looking at Africa to see maybe we can do that in Africa too. And we found that in some of the countries in Africa, everybody has cell phones. So it'd be kind of easy to treat them. But Liberia is one that doesn't have many cell phones. And we've got the mental health program in Liberia, and we still think that we might try to do this in Liberia too. But we have trained, when we began work in Liberia, there was one psychiatrist for the whole country. We have trained 166 mental health clinicians. Mental health clinicians, we call them, for adults. And when the Ebola situation came around, all of the programs in Liberia, access to information, access for women mostly, access to justice, maybe more, but my mental health program too. And all of the Carter Center programs stopped to work on Ebola, and it was so great that we already had 166 mental health people there and clinicians there to work with them. But the Liberia program has just been really good, and and that's one of the reasons that I want to see if we can do the telemedicine in Liberia, but we'll be looking at other places too. I think that's all I had to say. Well, okay.
We have time for some questions, and I'm going to start off with a question from Elizabeth, age 9. It actually could be addressed to both President and Mrs. Carter. Oh, no, it says, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a little boy? And how did your career path change?
Well, when I was a little boy, I wanted to be a naval officer. My only hope when anybody asked me what you want to be when you grow up was not a fireman or policeman or an engineer on a train. I always just wanted to go to the Naval Academy. And after that, just spend the rest of my life serving in the U.S. Navy. So I started off quite well. I went to the Naval Academy, and I served in the Navy for a long time. I was in submarines. I was a submarine officer and served on 3 submarines and 2 battleships. And then after that, I went into politics, as you may know. So, and then after that, I reached my highest level of achievement, and that was to come as one of the founders of the Carter Center.
Yay.
So I worked my way up from the Navy to be president and then to the Carter Center.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Carter.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. And about my only choice back then was secretary, school teacher, librarian. Back then, women couldn't go to school to be doctors and lawyers, and they could be a nurse. But those didn't appeal to me. I used to draw buildings. I was going to be an architect. I drew a lot of buildings and all, but I really didn't know when I went off to school what I wanted to study. I took a regular junior college course. That's how long I went to school, for 2 years. And then along came Jimmy Carter, so I didn't have any choice after that. Any other choice. I had not one choice, I had many choices.
I actually have another question for you, Mrs. Carter. Have you noted changes in the emphasis on mental health support and education under the present administration? What can we do to encourage support?
I think you could write a lot of letters to our former legislator. He was not in the Senate, was he? Who is the head of HHS now?
Tom Price.
But,
Yeah.
I took letters to the inauguration, gave them to the new president and his wife about mental health and about caregiving and about immunizations, because I've worked on immunizations as long as I've worked on mental health. And they read them because, they got them because at the luncheon that day of the inauguration, they told me they did. I don't know what that is.
Secretary Price.
Oh, yeah, Tom Price, he's the head of HHS now. He was at the time, he was a Georgia legislator. And I saw him at the inauguration, and I told him that I wanted him to give me somebody that I could be in touch with him and he did. And our staff has gone a good many times to talk with him. We don't know yet what's going to happen about mental health.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. President Carter, what would you do to manage the North Korean nuclear threat if you were president today? And I have to read the rest. And boy, do we wish you were president.
I'm going to say something which you probably won't like. The first thing I would do would be to treat the North Koreans with respect. I would be talking to them. I've been over there 3 times myself to deal with the leaders of North Korea. I've been out in the boondocks in North Korea in the little villages where the government didn't even know we were going to see about that distribution of food because people were starving over there. Their allocation of calories for a grown man was only 700 per day. And as you know, a diet is about 1,400 per day for a grown man. And so we have refused to talk to them since George W. Bush was in office, George Bush Jr. And Obama refused to have any discussions with the North Koreans, even though I went over there twice while he was in office, and urged him to talk to them. I think I know what the North Koreans want. The North Koreans want a peace treaty with the United States. We've only had a ceasefire since the Korean War was over. I was in a submarine in the Atlantic when the Korean War was going on. I remember very vividly. We only have a ceasefire. We don't have a treaty with them. And what they want is a firm treaty guaranteeing North Korea that the United States will not attack them or hurt them in any way unless they attack one of their neighbors, notably South Korea. But the United States has refused to do that. And I think that's what I would do is to work with the North Koreans. I would send my top person to Pyongyang immediately if I didn't go myself to talk to the North Koreans about how to defuse the issue. But until we are willing to talk to them and treat them with respect as human beings, which they are, then I don't think we're going to make any progress.
Thank you, sir. Another easy one, President Carter. Is the center involved in trying to help the terrible situation in Venezuela? How can that be done?
We have tried. I have met with President Maduro, and we knew President Chavez quite well. We helped to monitor 4 elections in Venezuela while Cesar Chavez was president, and after he died, I have met with Maduro concerning other problems. But Maduro, the present president, has decided that no international observers can come into Venezuela to monitor their elections. The Venezuelans have one of the best voting procedures in the world, and we pointed that out. But the government tries to influence the outcome of the election in every way they can, with money and with favors and that sort of thing. So that part of the election is not good. But what Maduro has done is to move very rapidly toward a total dictatorship without the approval of the people themselves. As you know, the recent election, which was about a month ago on a Sunday, set up a so-called constitutional commission to write a new constitution, and part of their vote was that they would immediately disband the parliament and let the Constitutional Commission take over all the duties of the parliament. And almost 100% of them are loyal to Maduro. So it's become quite overwhelmingly a dictatorship that excludes the Carter Center from any involvement in the process of elections of democracy. I hate to say. We're very eager to help Venezuela if we can. They just won't let us come in.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Carter, what can be done towards increasing the number of mental health providers in Georgia, especially pediatric psychiatrists?
Pediatric psychiatry.
Child psychiatrists.
I don't know. When Jimmy was president, I had a mental health law passed. It had parity in it, integration of services, all kinds of things. One was incentives for people to go into the mental health field. And we passed it in October. In November, as Jimmy says, he was involuntarily retired from the White House, and the incoming president put it on a shelf and never implemented it. Most of it was implemented, except the big things like parity and integration of services, and what we have integrated services now at the Carter Center. And so I don't know how to get people to go in the mental health field, but I wish this government would do something like that. If they would pass a law with some incentives for people to go into the mental health field, it would help tremendously, I think. Although now I think more people are willing to go into the field because stigma is beginning to lift a little bit. We have a long way to go, but it's beginning to lift, I think. I believe it's going to be pretty rapid. And more people are talking openly about having a mental illness, even people in high places, and that always helps. And I just am excited about the future of the mental health, what's happening in the mental health field. People can recover, and almost, the overwhelming majority can recover and lead good and contributed lives in the communities. And so I think there is going to be maybe a groundswell of people going into, but I still would like for the administration to pass a law.
One thing that can be done without government interference is to have medical schools concentrate on giving every medical doctor at least a small smattering of education about mental health. Most of them just ignore mental health completely during the training program to become a doctor.
Thank you. That's good.
Staying in the health field, President Carter, what is your position on the emerging anti-vaccine movement in the United States? What policy measures do you recommend to mitigate the public health and safety effects of this problematic trend?
It is problematic. I think it has no foundation. The main thing, obviously, is that immunizations from normal diseases cause autism among children, but that's been proven to be completely erroneous. And I think that the state governments around, I wouldn't say the federal government, ought to make sure that that there's a requirement, which we had when I was a child even, that all the children have to be immunized against the basic diseases like measles and so forth. So I think the main thing is that the government could do is to have the leaders, including Tom Price and others, announce that this is just a false premise, that there's no substance to the claim that immunization causes autism?
I might be able to answer that question next year because I have a fellow's going to be working on autism.
Terrific. Thank you. Education Secretary DeVos is attempting to undo requirements for sex offenders on college campuses, reporting requirements, sorry. She is concerned about the rights of the accused. In your view, President Carter, is there any merit to these concerns?
I think there might be on some college campuses where they have concentrated on nothing but prosecuting the alleged, sexual offender. And this has been a matter of some concern on a very few campuses. But I think the overwhelming concern should be to protect the girls who are raped quite regularly on college campuses. About 1 out of 5 girls who enter college are sexually assaulted before they graduate in the United States of America. And I think the main problem is, as I've addressed at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and other universities around the country personally, is that the sex offenders are excused, particularly if they are football players or somebody that's famous on the campus. And this has happened even in my alma mater at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. So I think that she has gone overboard, I believe. I haven't seen the details of her ruling, but I think she's gone overboard to protect the alleged rapists rather than having them brought before a judge and a jury to try them. But we need to respect their rights as well, of course.
Thank you. This reads, I know, Mrs. Carter, you have worked tirelessly to reduce the stigma of mental illness. Do you have any thoughts to share on the current drug addiction epidemic, especially heroin, among young people? And this is from a family that lost a friend this year to this epidemic.
We have begun to work on mental health and substance use. We started that at one of our symposia a few years ago, and it's coming together. I don't know whether, well, in the past, the funding for mental health and for substance use was in 2 different pots. But I think maybe they have put them together. I'm not sure. I hope they have. But that's one thing I can do that I think would help, because those with substance use, most all suffer from mental illnesses. And if we treat, if we could get them recognized as being needing mental health services, it might help a little bit. I don't know, because it's really hard to get mental health services today. But I don't know how to handle that problem.
One of the things that Rosa didn't address, and I think that maybe the question I wanted to get out, is the problem with opioids in our country. I could very well be a drug addict now. A few years ago, I had both my knees replaced. And when I left the hospital, they gave me a bottle this big with about 100 of the most powerful opioids in the medical profession. And I never took one of them. And I tried to give them to our local druggist so he could sell them. He said that wasn't permitted by law, so I flushed them down the toilet. But these things, a lot of just ordinary folks, particularly from West Virginia and that area of our country, they go to the hospital and they're given excessive numbers of very powerful drugs, and even let them bring them home with them like they did me, and then they become addicted. And I think one of the main causes of death and from overdose in our country now is opioids, which is caused by the medical profession indirectly, at least.
And Tom Price said that was one thing he was going to be working on, but I haven't heard anything about it.
President Carter, you've been asked about North Korea and Venezuela. This one reads, how do you currently feel about the possibility of peace in the Middle East?
are practically hopeless as far as giving justice to the Palestinians. I don't think that President Trump or his family members are making any progress in that respect. And I think that the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, has no intention at all of having a two-state solution go into effect. And as all of you probably know, every country on earth except Israel has endorsed the two-state solution as the only one, and that is for Israel and the Palestinians to agree to live side by side in peace, with the Palestinians having enough land to support their growing population. So at this moment, I don't see any signs that the Israelis or the Palestinians are going to be flexible enough to reach an agreement. Qatar and other countries have tried in the past to bring a solution to the problem, but at this point, I feel more dismal about the future of peace in the Middle East, particularly Israel and its neighbors, than I do in my life. This has been the number one goal of my life in foreign policy since I went to the White House, and that is to bring peace to the Middle East, and that means particularly peace between Israel and its neighbors. I don't see any prospect at this point of making any progress.
What words of wisdom and advice would you give our current president, President Carter? There are several with that theme.
I would say keep the peace, promote human rights, and tell the truth. By the way, I did all three.
And deregulated beer, too. Mrs. Carter, when it comes to gun violence and mass shootings, some Republicans have said that we have a mental health issue, not a gun problem. What do you think?
I hate the NRA.
All right. I think that may have said it all. Now we have a couple of questions that are on the same theme, and I'll just read one of them. And this question, like the others, is to both President and Mrs. Carter. For college students and the younger generation, and I'm going to add for all of us, what words would you like to share to address our concerns, hopes, and aspirations for the future?
You know, the advice I give to a lot of college students, I'm still a professor at Emory after I'm going to have my 35th town hall meeting tomorrow night, so this is good practice for me. I remember what my high school superintendent told me when I was a child, and told all the other boys and girls in our class. She said, we must accommodate changing times, but cling to principles that never change. And I think that's what we all have to do, because there's some circumstances, like the outcome of an election, that we can't change after the election's over. And we just have to do the best we can, accommodate the changing times, accommodate presidents we don't like on both sides, but still cling to certain principles that never do change. And I think I happen to be a Christian, and I look upon those principles that never change as being the ones that exemplify the life of Jesus Christ. And I would say that truth and justice and peace, we worship the Prince of Peace. I would say that compassion, understanding, those kind of love, those are the things that principles that never change. So that would be my advice to them, is just accommodate changing times the best you can without losing a commitment to your basic moral and ethical values or principles.
Well, this is what I tell young people. the time after you graduate from college is the freest time you'll ever have. And I would suggest that to any young person to join the Peace Corps or some organization where they can help other people. And I still think that would be the best thing they can do, because it will change the life of anybody that does that. It goes over to the Peace Corps, to Doctors Without Borders, or those, and they see how people live and under other kinds of lives. And I just think they come back changed. I've seen it so many times, and I think it would be, if they could all do that and take some time off, it would be a better world.
Also, to both President and Mrs. Carter, do you feel the country is pulling together after the hurricanes in Florida and Texas?
I believe that factor has helped to pull our country together. I think there's a lot less vituperation and animosity among people than it was before the hurricane hit Texas. And I think that this just shows the resilience and the courage and the love and respect for one another that exist among American people naturally. So I don't think there's any doubt that our country is probably politically divided more than it ever has been since the Civil War, or the war between the states. And I think that these terrible tragedies that naturally have pulled our country together, all praying for the lives and the well-being of the folks that were afflicted. So yes, I think it has helped. I hope it'll be permanent.
That would be nice.
I think
But I doubt it.
probably it has, but that was what I was going to say. I'm not trusting it to continue very much, but I hope that it will.
We have time for one last question, and I have one here that is like the several others I have left, a bit provocative. President Carter, in light of Russian hacking and voter suppression in the 2016 general election, will the Carter Center be monitoring the 2018 U.S. elections? The questioner goes on to say the integrity of U.S. democracy is at stake.
Well, you're the big boss. I really work for you, Mary Ann, so you'll have to decide. But I would say no. The United States of America, the way we conduct elections, does not qualify to meet the high standards that the Carter Center sets for participating. And I'll give you, I made this comment even before the 2016 elections. We require basically that in countries where we go to monitor election, that there be one central election commission that sets the standards that are uniform all over the country, so people vote the same day and the same hours and the same way. The United States doesn't have that. As you know, almost every county in the United States, more than 4,000 of them set their own rules, and they vary depending on what the local politicians want. The other thing is that we require pretty thoroughly that people who are running for office have equal access to the public news media. And ours are not that way at all. You couldn't hope to get the nomination of a Democratic or Republican Party now unless you're able to raise at least $200 million. And this money is given after the stupid Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United by rich people and by corporations. So I would say that we've become kind of more of an oligarchy than we have a democracy now. The rich people and the powerful people in our country decide a lot on who gets a nomination and therefore who is elected to office, not just presidents, but senators and governors and Congress members. And they also have a great insight into access to those people once they get in office because they support them financially. So the tax laws, when we have a so-called tax reform, is going to be just benefiting almost exclusively the rich people, and the powerful people become more powerful, the rich people become more rich. And so I don't think that the United States of America would qualify to have the Carter Center go in and try to orchestrate a successful and free and fair election where everybody's treated equally. No.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the question and answer session. Unless President or Mrs. Carter has anything to add, we will thank them for taking the time to be with us and for the wisdom they've shared with us this evening.
I was hoping for a question that I could answer at the end that would get applause, but I noticed my question and I answered it with applause. Anyway, I think that we have a long way to go in our country to get back to being a true and admirable democracy, but I think the American people can do it.
Yay. Don't forget the Islamophobia program in 2 weeks. Good night and thank you.